Yo, welcome back to the channel. It's your boy Dee Guwap. Next up, we have the problem with the Avatar Last Airbender live action by emergency. Let's get into it.
Avatar, Winx Club,
I only seen like half of the first episode of the live action. I'll give my opinion at the end, but
Death Note, One Piece. Long ago, these four nations lived in harmony. Then everything changed when the live-action adaptations attacked. Hey guys, what's up?
boy, that Death Note adaptation sucked. It was good for like its own thing, but damn, I ain't know Winx Club had all live
Dee
action.
Guwap, welcome back to my channel. Today we are talking about Avatar The Last Airbender, the live action. As of recording this, it is currently the #1 show on Netflix and has been the talk of the town in the TV and pop culture space for some good, for some bad, and for, of course, some ugly. Now, this show has been something that I've been looking forward to watching for at least the past couple of years, at least since it was announced that it was in production, which I think was either in 2020 or in 2021. So yeah, it's been a long time coming. And if you haven't been living under a rock, you know that it has come out and people have their opinions on it, for better or for worse. And honestly, I'd say that the loudest opinion that I've been hearing online is that people just aren't really enjoying this adaptation of Avatar The Last Airbender for a multitude of reasons, and are citing the exit of the original creators of Avatar from the project as being one of the telltale signs that this adaptation just was not going to be it. Now in this video, we're gonna be talking about it and breaking all that down because I feel like there is a lot of nuance in the conversation, and I want to give
I know that, but I'd be forgetting that the original creators tried to help, but they said no mas. And so that does say a lot about what they felt about the project.
my 2 cents about what I think about this adaptation because I feel like it was interesting. And then I want to branch out into the wider conversation about live action adaptations as a whole, because I feel like we've been seeing this theme of animated shows getting these live action adaptations. Sometimes they don't necessarily need one, and getting into why it is so hard, or at least seemingly so hard, to make these live action adaptations work. But before we get into all of that, if you are new to the channel and like all things TV, pop culture, commentary, and
Subscribe to him. He does great videos, great work.
Gen Z fashion, we actually talk about it all on here, then make sure to subscribe so that you don't miss out on any of the content that I have coming out every single week on this channel. It'd also be a huge help if you leave a like on this video because it helps out a ton with the YouTube algorithm. And follow me on my socials at Emergency on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter, as I'm quite active on those platforms as well. And if you're feeling extra spicy and want to support the channel even further, you can click the join button either here or here to become a channel member, which gets you early access to every one of these videos that you see on here, as well as 2 exclusive videos for channel members every single month. This month, channel members have gotten an exclusive Heartstopper Season 2 review, as well as the movie Bottoms review coming out later this week. So if that's of interest to you, then consider joining. But promo aside, let's talk about Last Airbender. I feel like one of the main critiques that I've been seeing for the Last Airbender live action is that it's kind of different from the source material. Now, season 1 of the live action adaptation takes us up to the end of book 1, which is
I'm gonna let him talk about his points, and I'm gonna talk about mine.
very similar to the previous live action that Atla fans have been traumatized by, but I can say confidently first and foremost that this live action completely demolishes. The previous live action was an atrocity. Like, at the very least, this show looks good. Like, you really can't argue with that. Like, this show visually looks good. Like, from the way that it's shot, the CGI, and for different important scenes, the show looks good, and we'll get more into that later. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's talk about why people were actually kind of hesitant going into this season. Because prior to the release of the season, there was a lot of drama around the casting of the show, as well as some of the changes that were going on with some of the characters. And before I go any further, I just want to clarify, the intention of this video is not to bash or really talk bad about any of the actors in this show, more so the characters and the way that the characters were written in this adaptation. I actually had the opportunity to meet the cast of The Last Airbender a couple weeks ago, and
I think that's always huge, bro. Something can suck. You don't personally have something against them. Like, that's such a closed mindset. Like, I have nothing against the cast. I don't know them personally.
Vegas, and they were all lovely and very clearly super passionate about this project. So none of this is to knock them at all. And I also encourage y'all in the comments to hold that same courtesy when discussing what y'all like and don't like. But in terms of the drama around casting, fans were upset due to the representation of certain characters, one namely being Sokka, who in the animated series is supposed to be indigenous. However, allegedly in the live action, Sokka's actor does not appear to be indigenous. And you know, on this channel I talk a lot about representation and the importance of representation in these characters. And honestly, one of the fears that I and many other people had when it came to the casting for this show, specifically when it comes to shows like this, where in the original source material, none of the characters, I don't think, are actually white, that they would go and whitewash the cast to make it more appealing to like the general American audiences. Do I wish that they would have been more intentional with finding an indigenous actor to fill the role of Sokka? Yes. But I also do feel like the actor that is playing Sokka did a great job with the role as well. However, I will say that the way that Sokka's character was written in this adaptation was left to be desired, because that leads to another mini controversy that came out before the show aired, in that it had been announced that Sokka's character in the live action would have his sexism dialed down in the series, which, thinking about
And the thing about that is it's huge. What I don't like about people is and this is most people's critique, not most people, but most people critique Avatar because of the last season, because of what they remember. Bro, you know that there is a growing process. Like people hate that Zuko is so immature and this and that. And it's like he was that in the first season. Like, why are y'all comparing the last season Avatar to the first season? So there was growth. And so with Sokka, he grew into more of a man. Like he's left his sexist ideal behind and he realized that women could, like women are equal to men because most of Team Avatar was women. Actually.
that as a headline and people being mad at that sounds crazy. Like, it does sound crazy because you kind of hope so, that like sexism would be out the show, but then you take into account how that aspect of Sokka's character really did impact his character and was kind of pivotal to his whole character arc throughout the show. Because when you start the animated series, Sokka's an asshole. He is. There's no way around it. He's an asshole for a good portion of the show. And I actually don't know how I necessarily feel about that specifically. I don't know. I'm not mad that they took out the sexism. I just feel like they could have went with another direction instead of the direction that they took his character. In a quote, his actor says that they took out the sexist element, but he still has attitude. It's not a sexist attitude, but it's morphed more into a I'm a leader and you're a follower sort of situation, which
That's kind of like, depending on how they play, it's kind of sexist. Me and Good Buddy said the same thing. But like I'm just now, as I'm talking to y'all, figuring this out. But yeah, most of Team Avatar was women, and like most of his trusted like people to go to battle with was women. So it, nah, the direction was stupid.
and sort of brings me to my thoughts on this whole adaptation. I'm gonna say this, grand scale, I personally feel that this adaptation was good. I feel like the people that are saying that this adaptation was trash, it was awful, and that it was even worse than the OG live action adaptation
Oh
are
no,
delusional. Because I don't believe you. I'm actually questioning your judgment as a human being and your visual prowess abilities. If you can sit down and watch what came out in like 2010, 2011, and then look at what came out last week and say that that was better than this. Because no, was this series a faithful retelling? No. But I don't think it ever set out and said that it was going to be that. Through and through, this is just a live action adaptation and interpretation on the original animated series. And I feel like if you watch it through that lens, knowing that it's not going to be a play-by-play series, I feel like this adaptation was really good for what it was. Like the first episode alone, like the first half of that episode was completely adaptation original content, just world building and setting the tone for how this series was going to go. Like they started off by showing the G side of the Air Nomads, which if you're not familiar with the original series was not how they started off the animated series, because that would be kind of heavy for a Nickelodeon show. And like I alluded to, I kind of like this darker take
true, true.
to the Last Airbender universe, because I feel like the adaptation has this interesting balance between adapting a kids show essentially while giving it this sort of Game of Thrones-esque levity to it. And despite the overall plot playing out the same way as it did in the animated series, the stakes seemed higher because the way that the narrative was crafted and because of the live actionness of it all. Like it felt like, despite watching the original show, it's just so interesting because the original show handled nearly the exact same topics, and I'm not sure if it's because I was a kid at the time when I first watched the show, or if it was like the animated cartoon medium of it. But for the first book, nothing really seemed that serious in the animated as it did with the live action. Like the live action does not stray away from depicting actual violence. I'm not saying that the animated didn't have his fair share of violence, but the fact of like seeing it be like real, and I feel like this adaptation really drove home like the plights and perils of both Aang the Avatar and Zuko, showing how hard their lives are right now. Like this whole season, they were both getting beat down real bad.
Uh, I think that's because you're kids. And also, people need to learn how to suspend disbelief from themselves. I've always knew their plates and perils because, like, if you take long and hard, but it's into Zuko and everything, but he wasn't loved. basically anybody in his family but his mother, and she mysteriously disappeared on his behalf. And that nigga lost everything and that right half of his face. And so, like, he had nothing, bro. His uncle didn't even need to go with him. He chose to do that. And so his dad sent that nigga out on a dummy mission because he was never going to bring back the Avatar. His dad knew that. He basically was like, don't come the fuck back. And then Aang lost all his people, bro. Like, I'm talking like, imagine if you're the only black person left because every other black person in the world got slaughtered, bro. Like, nah, stakes was high.
Like real bad. And now that I'm thinking about it, I feel like the reason why I feel this way has to do with the whole concept of pacing and the issues that this series has been having with pacing, from the sheer fact that in the animated adaptation, like, these very dark and serious plot points are padded in between episodes and moments of like sort of like slice of life, fillery, like comedy and humor. Whereas for this live action, it's kind of just like back to back to back action, or like back to back to back drama, tragedy, and just showing the impacts of war without having these like sort of funny bits in between. And we'll get back into pacing in a second, but I also feel like the reason why there was just like less comedy, I mean, there were still like some comedic aspects that were left in the show, but I feel like the delivery and the way that these comedic scenes were sort of meant to be set up kind of fell flat, which is actually one of my critiques for this adaptation. I feel like the line delivery and just some of the general dialogue across the board for all the characters kind of fell flat. Like, in those times where there was supposed to be jokes, where it was supposed to be funny, like, it just kind of didn't work. Because for one, the delivery, and two, like, the scenes where the comedy would try and be interjected would be so bleak. Like, it wouldn't just be a funny hee hee ha ha moment. It'd be like the scene before would just be like, oh my god, we just got bombed. And now let's throw in a joke about how much Saki eats. Like, you know, like, it just didn't really take the edge off in the way that I feel like it needed to, or at least in the way that it did in the animated series. And like I said, I love the actors down. And I feel like for the most part, they got the casting very right. Like Aang, I feel like Aang was perfectly casted. Like, Gordon is Aang. Like, you can't look at this kid and look at Aang and not see, like, they fit perfectly. They do. And he really did eat the role of Aang up. One thing though, this might just be nitpicky for me. What was going on with Aang's mic? I can't be the only one that noticed this, but everyone else's lines sounded fine. But Aang's lines, for some reason, sounded different from everyone else's. I'm not sure if he had to re-record some of his lines, but like, his dialogue always seemed more like condensed and studio produced, and I'm not sure exactly what that was. I don't think that was the fault of Aang, more so like stuff that was going on in post, but that was just something that I noticed. But yeah, enough about that. Let's talk about the pacing, because I feel like this is a point of contention that I've been seeing a lot of discourse on.
All these live action things will have poor pacing. Like, that's just, a budget is a motherfucker.
About. I've been seeing a lot of people talk about how much content was actually skipped in this first season, having it go through the entirety of book 1, which consisted of 20 episodes down into 8. And in that, they did skip a lot of content. But I gotta say that what they did with those 8 episodes, I didn't necessarily hate the pacing. Because while yes, it did cut some corners around characterization and just different things that would happen to Team Avatar in those 20 episodes, the subplot lines, some of like the filler episodes, training development and stuff like that, they still got through like the major plot points and handled those major plot points with some semblance of care. But again, a lot of that world building and explanations for things were cut short and altered. And I'm actually interested to know what someone who's never seen the animated series thinks of this series in terms of how much they're able to understand what's going on. Because I feel like this adaptation was made with the understanding that most people have seen the animated series and can fill in a lot of the gaps that the live action kind of leaves out. So if you've seen this live action and haven't seen the animated series, let me know. Were you able to keep up? Were you able to understand everything that was?
What he says makes sense, but I think it's a contradiction. They did this reimagining of a story we know, but they expect for you to watch them so truly for. If you know, if that makes sense, why are you going to alter the story if it's meant for new people? But there's points where watching the original would have filled in information for you know, like, I don't know if that makes sense, y'all, but I think that's kind of like a contradictory point
going on, because I want to also acknowledge that I feel like the reason why I was able to appreciate it and follow along with what was going on and not have as much of an issue with the condensed content is that I was able to mentally fill in the gaps and understand where they were going with the story. With that said though, the live action does end up getting multiple seasons and completing the story, which I do think it should do. I do want them to push for at least 10 episodes per season to get more of that world building, that comedy, and more of the lighthearted aspects that made us love the animated series, especially for book 2 and book 3, because we're going to need it to understand the gravity of everything that happens in those. But now let's talk about the elephant in the room, the bending, the CGI. I feel like that's always some of the most important things to talk about when it
I thought the bending was pretty good myself, I'm gonna be honest.
comes to a live adaptation of Avatar. Because I mean, I hate to keep bringing it up, but like the OG live action, the bending sucked. It looked really bad. Like, look at this. And look at this.
Nah, bro. I've never seen the one about M. Night Shyamalan. Bro, what?
And look at this. Like I said earlier, a lot of this show looks amazing. Like in the last episode, when Aang is in the Avatar state and in that whole water fish thing, that scene looked amazing. I'd say that my only issue with the bending overall would have to be with the airbending, specifically in the first episode. And I can't really knock airbending because I feel like that's one of the harder things to know how to animate or to get right, because how do you show that in a live action medium, because it's air. Like whenever
That's the truth. In real life, you won't really be able to see the damn bending if it's not for like the dust or the whatever.
they'd be like airbending when it wasn't like a lot of it, like when it wasn't like Aang like doing like a ground pound with like airbending and stuff, it would kind of just look pixely and underwhelming, where I didn't really know what was going on. I just assumed that when I'd see like pixels or like graininess on the screen that was airbending happening. But as the episodes went on, it got a little bit better, I think. But yeah, I gotta say overall, I don't understand the people that are saying that the bending looks bad or that it doesn't, or that it looks cheap, or like, I don't know. I liked it. Now let's move on to the characters in the live action adaptation of these characters. So first, I mentioned this before, but Aang, I feel like the portrayal of Aang was great. I feel like Aang's actor really did embody Aang. I feel like with this adaptation, we got a lot more in his head about like his doubts about being the Avatar. I don't necessarily remember it being as explicitly like, oh my god, I feel so bad for being the Avatar and like failing all these people in the OG, but just because I feel like in the animated series, he was more goofy, whereas in this adaptation, he's more serious throughout. Like, not to say there weren't goofy moments, but he definitely was not as goofy and as silly as his.
I think that's also part of his character development because he is 10. I don't think he fully understood, like, grasped that everything came and ended with him. Um, like, he knew he was the Avatar and he knew he had to bring balance, but it's like, what the fuck does that mean? You know? I say you know a lot. That shit's kind of weird.
Animated portrayal. And that kind of goes for every character across the board. Like, this adaptation was just so serious, which again isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's just not the original, which again, I don't think it set out to be. Katara's actress, love, but I feel like the character arc of Katara in this adaptation kind of confused me. It made me second guess who I thought Katara was from what I remember from the animated series. Katara seems so passive in this adaptation. Like, I feel like in the original, her whole character trait was her being bossy and her leading everyone around. When I think about Katara, at least in book 1 and book 2, like Katara is definitively the leader of the group. Like, she's the one making sure that everyone is on track and doing their thing. Like, she's very much the one that's in control and calling the shots. In fact, that's the whole reason in book 2 why Toph and Katara don't initially get along, because Katara is too bossy and Toph doesn't like to be bossed around. But in this adaptation, she's really docile. I can't say that she was ever really bossy in this adaptation. Like, I guess maybe at the end when she's like demanding that she be able to fight with the other male waterbenders, but like overall she's like very passive. Like, I feel like they took her nurturing aspect and kind of went too far with it, where they kind of compromised a lot of her character. Like, I feel like they turned a lot of her bossiness, a lot of her strong-willedness into like her just being powerful, because without a doubt, like they constantly mention in the show, like Katara is very strong. Katara is one of the strongest waterbenders, but that doesn't necessarily translate to her personality. And I feel like a lot of that.
And I think that comes down to, like, this might sound funny, but I think Sokka's change affected her change because now it's about followers and leaders instead of men and women, which kind of, yeah, that helped Katara in the animated series too, because it was her showing that women were just as equal as men. Yeah, they fucked up with Sokka.
Bossiness. When I think about the animated series, transferred over into Sokka and Sokka's character, because why wasn't Sokka goofy? Sokka, in my opinion, was way too serious. Like, he was too much of a leader where he wasn't in the animated series. Like, when I think about the animated series, I think about Aang and Sokka kind of just goofing around together, and Katara kind of having to corral them both. And I feel like a lot of the appeal of Sokka, sexism aside, is that in season 1 he was kind of not necessarily incompetent, but just generally unserious. And I feel like in this adaptation he was neither of those things. He was really bossy, he was looked at as the team's leader, and he gave like older sibling energy, when in the animated adaptation, like Katara, even though she is younger, she felt more like the older sibling. In fact, a lot of Sokka's character arc throughout the series is that he goes from being a very unserious person to becoming more serious, being more of a leader, more calculated. So that just kind of threw me off. And I'm not sure if the choice to do that was because of the whole sexism thing, or if it was because of them needing to prop his character up since he was the one non-bender, and in a show about benders they need to like make him more interesting. But I feel like they could have done that through more of a unserious tone. And
Where they fucked up was, once again, they took like the last season Sokka and made that first season Sokka. Because I get what he's saying. I guess Katara could have been looked at as a de facto leader, but Sokka's military strategy was his best points, and he just turned into like leading people. And so like he just evolved to where he kind of became the leader of Team Avatar. It's kind of weird. You would think Avatar is the leader, but Sokka was the mastermind. Like, he came up with the plans, even down to the failed solstice invasion. He You have to fail before you succeed in this world, and that was his failure before he succeeded.
that they try and go for more of that in a season 2. But yeah, now let's talk about Zuko. Zuko was funny. I feel like Zuko was the one character, besides Aang, I'd say, that was done 100% right. And a lot of y'all are gonna be mad at that, because a lot of people have been mad at the live action representation of Zuko, forgetting that in season 1, Zuko was a brat. He was whiny. He was annoying. Zuko season 1 in the animated series was annoying. I even remember that. So of course, in this live action adaptation, he's going to be just as whiny, just as annoying, just as persistent. And I feel like they got that down to a T. They even got his little sassiness. I made a TikTok reacted to his sassiness. His actor did a great job at channeling just the general whininess and brattiness of Zuko at that time. And I'm honestly banking that they make more seasons just so that we can see his redemption arc, because I feel like long-haired Zuko would eat. And so yeah. And then finally, Azula and Azula's friends. I'm gonna be honest, kind of underwhelming. I know that she wasn't super impactful to the plot for book 1, but in book 2 and 3, she's gonna have more of an impact. I sincerely hope that in those adaptations, we get a more sinister Azula, because Azula now, or at least the Azula that's been presented in this, does not seem sinister. She does.
And even though she didn't have a major impact to the story, because I remember General Zhao was that motherfucker, bro. He was terrorizing their asses. But Azula had presence from day one. Like, for the fact that it was like, oh damn, that's Zuko's sister. It was like, damn, that bitch seemed crazy.
Not seem as, like, it's said that she's calculated, but she does not seem as calculated and as cold as the Azula that's in the animated adaptation. And given that she's going to be a big bad at some point, I'm gonna need some of that viciousness to come through, because at this point it seemed that General Zhao is more vicious than Azula, and that's an issue. Now let's talk more big picture and address the whole concept of bringing animated series to live actions and this trend that we've been seeing in recent years. I feel like it's no secret that live action adaptations don't often work, and they tend to either be cringy, just flat out wrong, or seem detached from their source material, as we've seen in examples in the past. Like with the previous Avatar adaptation, the Winx Saga live action, the Death Note live action, and more. Like, there's just like a lot of examples of live action series not being good. And I feel like the core reason behind that is because they sort of all detach from the original source material. And bringing it back to this live action, it sort of went down the same path, which was really concerning. Because I'm not sure if you know this or remember, but the original creators of The Last Airbender were initially on board with the series. They're the one making this live action, which is why everyone was so excited. Because the previous one, the creators were not involved, but after the resurgence of Avatar during lockdown, the creators of the live action are really on board with Netflix of making a live action adaptation, which a lot of people had faith in, because that would mean that it would be more faithful and more true. And because the original creators were involved in it, there wouldn't be any shortcomings, or basically wouldn't be BS, because the original creators wouldn't want to put out a product like that. However, it was announced a little bit down the line that the original creators ended up backing out of the live action adaptation for creative differences, which of course would cause people to raise eyebrows, because what? Like, why? Like, the whole appeal of the Avatar live action coming out was the fact that the original creators were on board with this, and now that they weren't, it was kind of just like, oh, how is this going to be? How is this going to
Yeah.
work? Is this going to go down the path of so many other live actions? And by no means do I think it's a failure like previous adaptations. It just really makes you wonder what the series could have been and would have been if the OG creators were still a part of it. And that speaks to the larger issue of why live actions are so hard to get right. Like I've been alluding to, the majority of live actions suck, and ones that are good are rarities. Like the One Piece live action that came out last year. Complete exception to the rule because people genuinely liked it. But the issue that a lot of other projects run into is that these live action adaptations attempt to condense too much content, specifically content that was created and built for an older form of media, an older form of content consumption, into this modern new way of entertainment and content consumption that we have now. And they also, for some reason, always try to like superhero-ify animated media when it's made into live action. But getting first into the issue of condensing, a lot of these shows that are being remade and turned live action came out in a time where shows, specifically animated shows, ran for at least 20 episodes with multiple seasons. Whereas, as I've talked about in previous videos, television shows nowadays are lucky to have more than one season with 6 to 8 episodes, 10 episodes, it. This leads to a lot of content being condensed, which inherently omits a lot of context, character development, and just general nuances that make characters and storylines what they are, as well as giving valid reasonings and explanations for why things are the way they are, why characters are acting the way they are. And like I said before, we see this in the Last Airbender live action, where a lot of book 1 was condensed into 8 episodes. And while I feel like they did a great job curating what content goes into those 8 episodes and really trying their best to flesh out that content, because that's an inherently difficult task to do, to take 20 episodes worth of content and figuring out what deserves to be highlighted and what needs to stay in 8 episodes to make, 1, the story make sense, and 2, make something that's enjoyable to watch. It does lead to gaps in character development, reasoning, and explanations for these different character arcs. That's why we're seeing the issues that I brought up when I was talking about the characters, why these characters are so different, why their motivations and interactions just seem so different and not necessarily fully fleshed out yet. And I feel like the easy answer to this is to be like, okay, then just make more episodes and put more of that content in there. But because of the way that the industry is set up right now, the likelihood of that happening in the way that we want it is not high, which then makes you wonder if these are going to be put out regardless of if they're going to be faithful or accurate adaptations. Should they be made at all? That's a whole different conversation, but something to consider. And I feel like the other issue with a lot of live actions is that they try and superhero-ify their characters or their storylines, where it doesn't really work that way. And I feel like this is especially true for adaptations revolving around animation or with anime. And I don't know if y'all know this, but I am an avid anime consumer. I love me some anime. I get
Bro, I fuck with my boy. This was the point I was going to
on
make.
its own play,
Buddy,
okay?
I'm gonna let it
Something
ride.
that I've been noticing is that these Western adaptations try to convert these Japanese styles or Japanese inspired styles, in the case of Last Airbender, into this Western equivalent of what we think live action should be, which is typically, when we think of something that's live action and has powers, it's superheroes. And that just really doesn't convert well in terms of storytelling, because how you tell a superhero story is not the same way as you'd want to tell a Japanese inspired or a Japanese live action story, because it's just different. Like, from the grandiose action scenes filled with explosions, feigned drama, and effects that don't necessarily translate well into these other mediums, it just kind of seems off and like a projection of what we think a live action adaptation would be, instead of just giving a live action adaptation of what it is, if that makes sense. But enough about that. I kind of want to close out this video by talking about the future of the series and just final thoughts. And I'm gonna be honest, if you didn't gather this much by now, I genuinely like this series. I like this adaptation. Do I feel like there could be more done in the future to make it better, or things that could have been done differently to make it better? Yeah, but I don't think it's a bad adaptation or a bad series whatsoever. And I honestly hope that it does get more seasons and that it actually goes to completion and actually finishes the whole Avatar story. So I need like 2 or 3 more seasons, just because I want to see what it would look like, because we've never gotten past book 1 in a live action medium. Like, the OG live action stopped at book 1. This adaptation has stopped at book 1. I want to see what Toph would look like in live action. I said it. I want to see live action Aang at the end of the series, bending all 4 elements, fighting Fire Lord Ozai. That's what I want to see. I'm sorry. I want to see metal bending. I want to see swamp bending. I want to see blood bending. I want to see all of that in live action. I want to see Azula try to flirt with a boy at a beach while simultaneously terrifying him and threatening him. They can do a good job while simultaneously terrifying him and threatening him in the same breath. Like, I want to see that. And I feel like with time, and I feel like with taking the criticisms that they've been receiving from season one, they can do a good job, or at least a better job, at adapting the rest of the story. Plus, I feel like it's going to be so cool seeing the cast age with the show, because Aang's actor Gordon is around the same age as Aang in the show. And as Gordon grows up, Aang is going to grow up. And I just feel like it would be cool to see that in a similar way it was cool to see the kids on Sex Education get older with the show. But what's next up for Avatar fans? I'm so excited because apparently there's a lot coming for us. Like, there's supposed to be the Earth Avatar series that's supposed to be coming up next year, as well as I believe the animated series of the original Team Avatar, but like as adults in their 20s and 30s, in between the original Last Airbender and Legend of Korra. I'm excited for that because I'm an Avatar stan. I love me some Avatar down, and I assume since you're watching this video, you do too. So let me know down in the comments what you're most excited for. Did you like the live action? Did you not like the live action? Do you think that the negative opinions are overrated? Do you feel like the show is overrated? Let me know all your thoughts down in the comment section below. I have to give this show a solid 8.5 out of 10. I am sorry. I really did enjoy watching it. What was good was great. What was bad was bad. But yeah, I gotta say 8.5, 8, like it 8. But thanks again so much for
And I
watching.
think live actions is America's way of saying anime still isn't popular. Like, it needs to go through a different form of media to be enjoyed by the majority, and that's just not the case. Another one. I've never made it past episode ones of live actions because I just can't get into that shit. And so it's like Avatar did look good, but it's just I don't know. One he didn't mention was Yu Yu Hakusho, and I think it was done decently. One Piece was done decently, but do not watch these live actions. I think you have a full grasp of the story. You should always go for the animated one. That's not me gatekeeping anyway. I'm just why would you go for the inferior one? Well, if somebody never had um if somebody never went to a cookout before, would you take them to the fast food place cookout, or would you go get a grill and actually cook out? Um uh yeah. So I think I don't know, I feel like um Western audience, like the Western execs are trying to bastardize anime because I feel like it's a high majority of animes getting these live action treatments. Like you said, they're getting superhero fied. Like what makes anime so appealing is just niggas with powers. Like it's not a show about powers and niggas. It's just niggas that discovered they had powers, but they still niggas. Like I know that sounds stupid, but hey, uh, but yeah, uh, so that's what it is. And it's like I'm gonna be honest with you, and I'd say this all the time. This is like even with comic book movies. People think DC is running the game because of their cinematic universe. Cinematics will never have anything on animation. That's not innuendo. That's not speculation. You can design more with animation than you can with live action, and you can capture the mind and be more appealing through animation. So that's why there's never any real like there isn't any debate about that. And so I feel like you're limited to the amount of stuff that you can show on the screen. Um, but all in all, hey, it's for somebody. I'm not watching this shit. Hell, I watched that one. I watched that half episode with somebody else. I don't even have Netflix, but I am intrigued with Avatar and where they take it. Oh, my other point, my big thing is if it's a reimagining, why don't they just do a whole different? Like, why don't they pick people with different names? Like they could have done an avatar from any time period, you know? Like, same thing with Death Note. They could have had Ryuk but did a different person. Like he got bored again after light. Like, if you're gonna reimagine it, you might as well make your own story. Why are you changing the story? Hell, it's kind of like what Hollywood does for these biopics. They reimagine their life. Bro, you can't reimagine a life. Now, I know it's completely different, but like you can't reimagine somebody's life. That was their fucking life. Um, just you might as well just make your own character. That's honest to God what they should do. They have enough information, enough lore to where they could have done that. But I digress. Tell me how y'all like Avatar. the live action. Tell me if you're excited for all the new Avatar content coming out. And be sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss more content like this. And I'll catch you next time.